The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard as Sergeant Marcus Wellington adjusted his crimson tunic for the final time. His polished boots reflected the early light as he took his position outside Buckingham Palace, the weight of tradition settling on his shoulders like a familiar cloak. 23 years of military service had prepared him for many things, but nothing quite like the peculiar events that would unfold on this seemingly ordinary Tuesday. Marcus had earned his place among the Queen's Guard through years of dedication and an unwavering commitment to duty. His colleagues respected him not just for his military precision, but for his calm demeanor under pressure. Standing at 6 feet 2 inches with broad shoulders and steady hands, he possessed the physical presence expected of his position, yet it was his mental fortitude that truly set him apart. The tourists had already begun gathering despite the early hour, cameras ready to capture the stoic guards in their iconic uniforms. Marcus had grown accustomed to the constant attention, the whispered conversations, and the occasional attempt by visitors to make him break character. He understood that for many, seeing the Royal Guard was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and he took pride in maintaining the dignity of his role. As he settled into his stance, Marcus noticed 3 men approaching from across the square. Something about their gait immediately caught his attention. While most tourists moved with wonder and respect, these 3 walked with a swagger that suggested different intentions. Their voices carried across the morning air, loud and boisterous, already drawing stares from other visitors. The tallest of the 3, a man with unkempt hair and wrinkled clothes, pointed directly at Marcus while speaking to his companions. Even from a distance, Marcus could sense the aggressive energy radiating from the group. His years of experience had taught him to read body language like a second language, and every signal these men were sending spelled trouble. The middle man, stocky with rolled-up sleeves revealing numerous tattoos, gestured dismissively toward the palace guards. His laughter was harsh and mocking, clearly intended to be heard by those around him. The third member of their group, younger but equally belligerent, nodded along enthusiastically, feeding off the negative energy his companions were generating. Marcus remained motionless, his expression unchanged, but his mind was already calculating distances, escape routes, and potential threats. This wasn't his first encounter with troublemakers, though something about this particular trio felt different. Their confidence seemed artificially inflated, as if they were performing for an invisible audience or trying to prove something to themselves. The growing crowd of tourists began to sense the tension as well. Parents pulled their children closer, and several visitors stepped back, creating a wider circle around the guards' positions. The normal chatter and excitement of the morning tour groups faded to nervous whispers as all eyes turned toward the approaching confrontation. Marcus's training kicked in automatically. His breathing remained steady, his posture unchanged, but every muscle in his body was now coiled and ready. Years of military discipline had taught him that the best fights were the ones that never happened. But when conflict became inevitable, decisive action was the only acceptable response. The 3 men continued their approach, their voices growing louder with each step. Other guards in the vicinity had noticed the disturbance as well, though protocol demanded they maintain their positions unless directly threatened. Marcus knew he was on his own for whatever was about to unfold, but that knowledge brought him comfort rather than concern. He had faced far worse odds in far more dangerous places. As the trio drew closer, Marcus could make out fragments of their conversation. They were discussing which guard looked like the easiest target, debating how far they could push before facing consequences. Their words revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what they were dealing with, and Marcus almost felt sorry for them. Almost. The morning that had begun with such promise was about to take a dramatic turn, but Marcus Wellington remained exactly where duty demanded he stand, ready for whatever challenge these 3 men thought they were prepared to present. The 3 men finally reached the edge of Marcus's immediate vicinity, their intentions becoming crystal clear with every passing second. The tallest one, who seemed to be their unofficial leader, stepped forward first. His breath reeked of alcohol despite the early hour, and his bloodshot eyes gleamed with misplaced confidence. Behind him, his 2 companions snickered and nudged each other, clearly enjoying what they perceived as entertainment. "Look at this one," the leader announced loudly, ensuring his voice carried to the gathered tourists. "Standing there like some kind of statue. Bet he thinks he's real tough in that fancy costume." His words were deliberately provocative, designed to elicit a reaction that would justify whatever they had planned next. Marcus remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed straight ahead according to protocol, but his peripheral vision tracked every movement, every gesture, every shift in positioning from all three men. He noted the leader's slightly unsteady balance, the way the stocky man kept clenching and unclenching his fists, and how the youngest member of their group seemed to be recording the encounter on his phone. The stocky man moved to Marcus's left side, attempting to flank him while keeping up a steady stream of taunts. "My mate here thinks you guards are just for show," he called out, his voice dripping with mockery. "Says you wouldn't know a real fight if it smacked. You in that silly hat." The crude laughter that followed his comment echoed off the palace walls. Several tourists had begun recording the scene with their own phones, sensing that something significant was about to happen. A family with young children hurried away from the area, while others pressed closer, morbid curiosity overriding their common sense. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense as more people became aware of the developing situation. The youngest troublemaker circled to Marcus's right, completing what they clearly thought was a strategic positioning. "He's not even looking at us," he announced with false bravado. "Must be scared. Probably never been in a real scrap in his life." His companions laughed appreciatively, their confidence growing with each unanswered insult. Marcus could have told them about the 3 tours of duty he had completed, the medals he had earned, or the numerous real combat situations he had survived. He could have explained that his stillness wasn't fear, but rather the calm that comes from absolute certainty in one's abilities. Instead, he continued to follow protocol, allowing them to dig their own graves with each increasingly aggressive action. The leader took another step closer, now standing directly in front of Marcus and barely an arm's length away. "I'm talking to you, toy soldier," he snarled, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a menacing whisper. "Don't you have any manners? When someone's speaking to you, the polite thing is to answer." The crowd had grown considerably larger now, forming a loose circle around the unfolding drama. Many visitors seemed uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, but found themselves unable to look away. Some had begun whispering among themselves, debating whether they should intervene or call for additional security. Marcus's commanding officer had once told him that the most dangerous enemies were often those who underestimated their opponents. These 3 men were walking textbook examples of that principle. Their loud voices and theatrical gestures revealed their fundamental inexperience with genuine confrontation. They were performing rather than preparing, seeking attention rather than actually intending serious harm. But intention mattered less than action when it came to Marcus's responsibilities. The moment they crossed certain lines, protocol would shift dramatically. His duty was to protect the dignity of his position and the security of the area, and these 3 were rapidly approaching the point where those duties would require decisive intervention. The stocky man reached into his jacket pocket, withdrawing what appeared to be a small flask. He took a long drink before offering it to his companions, their behavior becoming increasingly erratic with each passing moment. The smell of cheap whiskey joined the already unpleasant atmosphere surrounding the group. "Maybe we should help him loosen up a bit," the leader suggested to his friends, his voice now carrying an unmistakable note of threat. "Looks like he's wound a bit too tight for his own good." The implications of his words were clear to everyone present, and several tourists began backing away more urgently. Marcus felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that always preceded action, though his exterior remained as composed as ever. The time for patience and protocol was rapidly running out, and these 3 men had no idea how dramatically their morning was about to change. The moment of truth arrived when the leader made his fatal mistake. Emboldened by what he mistook for weakness, he reached out and placed his hand firmly on Marcus's shoulder, giving it an aggressive shake. "Are you deaf as well as dumb?" he demanded, his fingers gripping the fabric of the ceremonial uniform with clear disrespect. That single touch was the line that should never have been crossed. In the world of royal protocol, laying hands on a guard while on duty was not just disrespectful, it was a direct threat to the security they were sworn to protect. Marcus felt the familiar click in his mind as training took over, years of preparation condensing into a single moment of absolute clarity. The transformation was so sudden that several witnesses would later claim they had witnessed something almost supernatural. One moment Marcus was the perfectly still statue these men had been mocking, and the next he was a force of nature unleashed with surgical precision. His right hand moved in a blur, catching the leader's wrist and twisting it in a direction nature never intended. The sharp crack of bone was audible even over the gasps of the surrounding crowd. The leader's face went from smug confidence to shocked agony in the space of a heartbeat. His legs buckled as the pain shot through his nervous system, and he found himself on his knees before his brain could fully process what had happened to him. "You are now under arrest for assault on a member of Her Majesty's Guard," Marcus announced, his voice carrying the authority of centuries of military tradition. The words were delivered with the same calm precision he had maintained throughout the entire encounter, as if breaking a man's wrist was simply another routine duty to be performed. The stocky companion, who had been so eager to participate in the harassment, suddenly found himself facing a very different situation than he had anticipated. His alcohol-fueled courage evaporated as he watched his friend writhing on the ground, clutching his damaged wrist and making sounds that were barely human. "You can't do that," the stocky man protested, though his voice lacked any real conviction. "We were just having a laugh. It was just a joke." His earlier bravado had completely disappeared, replaced by the desperate pleading of someone who suddenly realized they were in far deeper water than they had ever intended to. "Enter." Marcus fixed him with a stare that had intimidated far more dangerous men in far more perilous situations. "Assault on a royal guard is no laughing matter," he replied, his tone suggesting that the stocky man was welcome to test this principle if he felt particularly brave. "I suggest you step back and place your hands where I can see them." The youngest member of their group had gone completely pale, his phone still recording but his hands shaking so badly that the footage was probably unusable. He had started this morning thinking he was about to witness his friends humiliate a guard, and instead found himself documenting their complete and utter defeat. The crowd of tourists had erupted into a mixture of cheers and gasps. Some applauded Marcus's swift action, while others seemed shocked by the sudden violence. Children were hastily ushered away by their parents, though many adults seemed unable to tear their eyes away from the unfolding drama. "Please," the leader gasped from his position on the ground. "I think you broke my wrist. I need a doctor." His earlier arrogance had been completely replaced by genuine fear and pain. The casual harassment he had thought would be consequence-free was turning into a nightmare he could never have imagined. Marcus showed no sympathy for his predicament. "You should have considered the consequences before laying hands on a member of the Queen's Guard," he replied matter-of-factly. "Medical attention will be provided after you are properly processed according to protocol." The stocky man took an uncertain step forward, as if considering whether to help his injured friend or attempt some kind of rescue. Marcus shifted his stance almost imperceptibly, but the message was clear. Any aggressive action would be met with the same swift and decisive response that had already disabled their leader. "I wouldn't recommend it," Marcus advised, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Your friend made a choice and now he's facing the consequences. You have the opportunity to make a better choice." The sound of approaching sirens could be heard in the distance as palace security responded to the incident. Additional guards were already moving into position, though it was clear that Marcus had the situation completely under control. The three men who had arrived with such confidence now found themselves at the mercy of the very person they had attempted to intimidate. The morning sun continued to shine down on the courtyard, but the atmosphere had changed completely. What had begun as a routine day for Marcus had become a masterclass in why the Queen's Guard commanded respect around the world. Within minutes, the courtyard had transformed into a scene of organized chaos. Palace security arrived with military precision, their black uniforms a stark contrast to Marcus's ceremonial red. Behind them came metropolitan police officers, their radios crackling with updates as they assessed the situation and began establishing a secure perimeter around the incident. Inspector Sarah Chen, a veteran officer who had handled numerous incidents at royal venues, took charge of the scene immediately. She surveyed the situation with practiced eyes, taking in the injured man on the ground, his two shaken companions, and Marcus standing at perfect attention, as if nothing unusual had occurred. Her years of experience had taught her to read situations quickly, and this one was refreshingly straightforward. "Sergeant Wellington," she addressed Marcus with the respect due to his rank and position, "please provide your account of what transpired here." Her tone was professional but warm, recognizing that she was dealing with a highly trained soldier who had acted within his authority. Marcus recounted the events with military precision, his report clear and concise. He detailed the escalating harassment, the physical contact that constituted assault, and his measured response according to established protocols. His words painted a picture of professionalism under pressure, of a man who had given every possible opportunity for de-escalation before taking necessary action. The crowd of tourists had swelled to nearly 100 people, all eager to witness the aftermath of the confrontation. Many were still recording with their phones, creating what would undoubtedly become viral footage within hours. Some visitors seemed thrilled to have witnessed such drama, while others appeared genuinely concerned about the injured man's condition. "My wrist," the leader continued to moan, his earlier swagger completely forgotten in the face of genuine pain. "I think it's broken." This is police brutality. His attempts to portray himself as a victim fell flat in the face of dozens of witnesses who had seen him initiate the physical contact. The stocky companion had begun to sober up rapidly, the adrenaline and shock burning through his alcohol-induced confidence. "We didn't mean any harm," he pleaded with Inspector Chen, his voice taking on a wheedling quality. "It was just a bit of fun. We're tourists, we didn't know about any rules." Inspector Chen's expression remained neutral, though those who knew her well might have detected a slight tightening around her eyes. She had heard similar excuses countless times before, and they rarely impressed her. "Ignorance of the law is not a defense," she replied calmly, "especially when that ignorance involves assaulting a member of the Queen's Guard." Paramedics arrived to tend to the leader's injury, their professional assessment confirming what Marcus had already known. The wrist was indeed broken, though cleanly and without complications. The man's dramatic groaning seemed somewhat excessive given the nature of the injury, leading several observers to roll their eyes at his theatrics. "Will charges be filed?" one of the tourists called out, clearly hoping for more drama to unfold. Inspector Chen ignored the question, focusing instead on gathering witness statements and ensuring the scene remained secure. The formal legal proceedings would follow established procedures, regardless of public curiosity. The youngest member of the troublesome trio had finally stopped recording, his phone battery dead and his enthusiasm for documentation completely drained. He stood slightly apart from his companions, clearly hoping that distance might somehow separate him from their fate. His earlier excitement had been replaced by a growing understanding of the serious legal trouble they now faced. Marcus maintained his position throughout the entire process, his bearing unchanged despite being at the center of considerable attention. Tourists continued to approach him for photographs, apparently viewing his decisive action as confirmation of the guard's legendary status, rather than something to be feared. "How did you learn to do that?" a young boy asked his father while pointing at Marcus. The father, who had witnessed the entire encounter, explained in hushed tones about military training and the serious nature of the guard's duties. The boy listened with wide eyes, clearly impressed by what he had seen. Inspector Chen completed her initial interviews and began the process of formally arresting the three men. The charges would be serious. Assault on a police officer, disturbing the peace, and public intoxication were just the beginning. Their morning's entertainment was about to cost them considerably more than they had ever imagined. "Sergeant Wellington," Inspector Chen addressed Marcus once more, "your actions were completely justified and professionally executed. We'll need a formal statement for our report. But I want you to know that your response was exemplary." Her words carried the weight of official approval and would be reflected in the reports filed with both police and military authorities. The leader was loaded onto a stretcher, still complaining about his treatment despite the gentle care provided by the paramedics. His companions were placed in handcuffs, their tourist adventure having taken a decidedly unpleasant turn. As they were led away, several onlookers applauded, showing their support for Marcus and their disapproval of the troublemaker's behavior. As the police vehicles disappeared around the corner with their passengers, the courtyard began to settle back into something resembling normalcy. However, the aftermath of the incident continued to ripple through the crowd of tourists and palace staff alike. Marcus found himself the center of attention in a way that went far beyond the usual curiosity directed at the Queen's Guard. Word of the confrontation had spread rapidly through social media, with multiple videos of the incident already accumulating thousands of views. The footage showed the entire sequence from different angles, providing clear evidence of the harassment Marcus had endured and the professionalism with which he had responded. Comments poured in from around the world, praising his restraint and decisive action. Colonel James Hartwell, Marcus's commanding officer, arrived within the hour to personally assess the situation. A distinguished man in his 50s with silver hair and sharp eyes, he had served with Marcus in Afghanistan and knew his character intimately. After reviewing the witness statements and viewing the video footage, his expression showed nothing but approval. "Textbook response, Sergeant," Colonel Hartwell told Marcus privately. "You gave them every opportunity to walk away, maintained protocol throughout the harassment, and acted decisively when they crossed the line. The regiment can be proud of your conduct today." His words carried special weight, coming from a man who had seen Marcus under fire in far more dangerous circumstances. The tourist who had recorded the clearest footage of the incident approached Marcus hesitantly, clearly wanting to speak but unsure of protocol. Margaret Thompson, a retired teacher from Yorkshire, had been visiting London with her grandchildren when she witnessed the confrontation. Her video had already been shared thousands of times online. "I wanted you to know," she told Marcus quietly, "that everyone here saw exactly what happened. Those men were completely out of line and you handled it perfectly. My grandsons are 8 and 10, and they kept asking if all the guards are as brave as you." Her words reflected the sentiment of most witnesses, who had been impressed rather than disturbed by Marcus's actions. The palace administration had also taken notice of the incident. Within 2 hours, a formal commendation was being prepared, recognizing Marcus's professional conduct under pressure. Such recognition was rare and carried significant weight within military circles, representing not just approval but celebration of exemplary service. Local news crews had begun arriving, drawn by the viral nature of the footage and the dramatic story it told. However, palace security maintained strict protocols about media access, allowing filming only from designated public areas. The guards themselves remained off-limits for interviews, maintaining the traditional separation between their ceremonial duties and public commentary. Dr. Elizabeth Winters, a military psychologist who specialized in stress response and tactical decision-making, later reviewed the footage for a training presentation. She noted that Marcus had demonstrated every principle of proper escalation management, from initial patience through measured response to appropriate follow-through. "What we see here," she explained to her audience of military personnel, "is a perfect example of how proper training translates into instinctive correct action." Sergeant Wellington never lost control, never used excessive force, and never allowed emotion to override judgment. This is exactly how such situations should be handled. The 3 troublemakers, meanwhile, were discovering that their morning's entertainment would have lasting consequences. The leader's broken wrist required surgery and would take months to heal properly. More significantly, their arrests had been recorded in the system, affecting future travel plans and employment opportunities. Their lawyer, hastily contacted by worried family members, explained the seriousness of their situation. Assault on a member of the Queen's Guard was not treated lightly by British courts, especially when the incident had been so thoroughly documented by multiple witnesses. The viral nature of the footage had also made it impossible to claim the incident had been misunderstood or exaggerated. Back at the palace, Marcus had resumed his normal duties as if nothing unusual had occurred. To him, the incident represented exactly the kind of situation his training had prepared him for. He felt no pride in having injured someone, but he felt complete confidence that his actions had been necessary and appropriate. Young children continued to stare at him with even greater awe than usual, having witnessed firsthand the reality behind the ceremonial uniform. Parents found themselves fielding questions about military service and the importance of duty, using Marcus as an example of how preparation and professionalism could meet any challenge. The incident had also sparked broader discussions about respect for authority and the consequences of poor decisions. Social media was filled with debates about tourist behavior, the role of the military in modern society, and the importance of understanding cultural expectations when visiting foreign countries. As evening approached, Marcus reflected on the day's events during his brief break between shifts. He thought about the training that had prepared him for moments like this, the split-second decisions that could define careers, and the responsibility that came with wearing the uniform. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to serve with honor, just as this day had. The following morning brought an unexpected development that would cement Marcus's actions as more than just a single incident of professional conduct. The Royal Military Academy had requested permission to use the footage from the confrontation as a training tool for future guards, recognizing the textbook nature of his response under pressure. Lieutenant General Patricia Morrison, one of the highest-ranking women in the British military, personally reviewed the case as part of her responsibilities overseeing royal security protocols. Her analysis would become part of the official record and would influence training procedures for years to come. What Sergeant Wellington demonstrated, she wrote in her report, was not just individual excellence but the culmination of institutional training at its finest. His actions reflect credit not only on himself but on every person involved in preparing our soldiers for such challenges. Her words carried weight throughout the military hierarchy. The three troublemakers had spent the night in custody, their hangover compounded by the growing realization of their legal predicament. The leader's wrist had been set and cast, but the doctors warned that full mobility might never return due to the nature of the break. His companions faced charges that could result in significant fines and potential jail time. Marcus himself had returned to duty with characteristic professionalism, though he couldn't help but notice the increased respect in the eyes of his fellow guards. Several younger soldiers had approached him privately, asking for advice on handling difficult situations and maintaining composure under pressure. The key, Marcus told one eager recruit, is to never let emotion drive your decisions. Training takes over when you need it most, but only if you've truly internalized the principles. Yesterday wasn't about strength or aggression. It was about knowing exactly how much force was necessary and applying it precisely. The media attention continued to grow, with international news outlets picking up the story as an example of British military professionalism. The footage had been viewed millions of times across various platforms, with commentary ranging from serious analysis of security protocols to humorous observations about the futility of challenging trained soldiers. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a sociologist who studied tourist behavior, used the incident as a case study in her research on cultural respect and personal responsibility. What we see here, she explained in her published paper, is a perfect storm of alcohol, arrogance, and ignorance, meeting immovable professional standards. The outcome was entirely predictable. The tourism industry also took notice of the incident, with several companies updating their pre-visit briefings to include more specific warnings about appropriate behavior around royal sites. The footage became part of orientation materials, showing clearly what could happen when visitors crossed clearly established boundaries. Colonel Hartwell had used the incident as a teaching moment during the weekly briefing for all Royal Guard personnel. Sergeant Wellington's actions remind us that our ceremonial duties never diminish our operational responsibilities, he explained to the assembled soldiers. We serve multiple roles simultaneously, and excellence in each role reinforces the others. The palace administration had also implemented new procedures based on lessons learned from the incident. While Marcus's response had been perfect, they recognized opportunities to prevent such situations from developing in the first place. Additional signage was installed, and security briefings were updated to better prepare staff for similar encounters. International military observers had requested copies of the training materials that had prepared Marcus for his response. His actions were being studied in military academies from Australia to Canada, serving as an example of how proper preparation could turn potentially dangerous situations into demonstrations of professional excellence. The legal proceedings against the three men moved forward swiftly, with their lawyer advising them to accept plea agreements rather than risk trial. The evidence was overwhelming and public opinion was strongly against them. Their moment of poor judgment would follow them for years to come, affecting everything from employment opportunities to travel privileges. Marcus received a personal letter from a combat veteran who had lost his leg in Afghanistan. Praising his restraint and professionalism, "You showed exactly the kind of discipline that makes me proud to have served," the letter read. "Thank you for representing all of us with such honor." Such messages arrived daily, from military personnel, law enforcement officers, and civilians who appreciated seeing training and dedication validated. The incident had also sparked interest from recruiters. who saw Marcus's actions as powerful advertising for military service. Young people across the country had watched the footage and asked themselves if they had what it took to perform under such pressure. Several recruitment offices reported increased interest following the viral spread of the video. As the week progressed, Marcus found himself slightly uncomfortable with the attention, but deeply proud of how the incident had reflected on his unit and his service. He had done exactly what his training had prepared him to do, but the broader impact exceeded anything he could have imagined when he took his position that Tuesday morning. 6 months after the incident, Marcus Wellington stood once again at his post outside Buckingham Palace, but the world around him had changed in subtle and significant ways. The viral footage had become part of internet legend, referenced in discussions about professionalism, respect, and consequences. More importantly, it had influenced policy and training across multiple institutions. The Royal Military Academy had formally incorporated the incident into their curriculum, with Marcus's response serving as the gold standard for situational awareness and graduated response. New recruits studied the footage frame by frame, learning to recognize the subtle signs that preceded the confrontation and the precise moment when defensive action became necessary. Marcus had been invited to speak at several military training facilities, though he consistently declined most requests. His natural humility made him uncomfortable with the celebrity status that had followed the incident. When he did agree to speak, usually to small groups of fellow guards or security personnel, his message remained consistent and simple. Training isn't about preparing for the fight you expect, he would tell his audiences. It's about being ready for any situation that requires your intervention. That morning, I wasn't thinking about becoming famous or making a statement. I was simply doing my job according to my training and my oath. His words carried weight because they came from someone who had proven their principles under pressure. The 3 troublemakers had completed their legal proceedings months earlier. The leader's wrist had healed, though not perfectly, leaving him with a permanent reminder of his poor decision. All 3 had been banned from royal properties and faced significant financial penalties. More importantly, they had been forced to confront the reality that actions have consequences, regardless of intentions. Their lawyer had attempted to argue that they were simply tourists who had misunderstood cultural norms, but the judge was unimpressed. Respect for authority and basic human decency are not cultural concepts, he had stated during sentencing. They are fundamental principles of civilized behavior, and ignorance of them is no excuse for assault. The incident had also influenced international discussions about tourist behavior and cultural sensitivity. Several countries had updated their travel advisories to include more specific guidance about appropriate conduct at ceremonial sites. The footage was used in orientation programs for travelers, serving as a stark reminder that different cultures had different boundaries. Dr. Elizabeth Winters had published her analysis of the incident in the Journal of Military Psychology, where it became one of the most cited articles of the year. Her breakdown of Marcus's decision-making process had become required reading in military academies worldwide, offering insights into how proper training could produce instinctive correct responses even under pressure. The tourism industry around Buckingham Palace had actually benefited from the incident, with visitor numbers increasing as people hoped to witness similar drama. However, the behavior of tourists had noticeably improved, with fewer attempts to interact inappropriately with the guards. The clear demonstration of consequences had created a more respectful atmosphere overall. Marcus's fellow guards had adapted to their colleagues' fame with typical military humor. They occasionally joked about his celebrity status, but never in a way that diminished respect for his actions or his character. If anything, the incident had strengthened the bonds within the unit, reinforcing their shared commitment to excellence. The palace administration had used the incident to justify increased security measures and clearer protocols for handling disruptions. While they hoped never to see a repeat of such behavior, they were better prepared to respond if similar situations arose. Marcus's actions had become the template for appropriate response. Colonel Hartwell had been promoted partly based on the exemplary conduct of his personnel, with Marcus's actions serving as evidence of the quality of training and leadership within his command. He often reflected on how a single moment of professional excellence could have such far-reaching positive effects. As Marcus stood at his post on this quiet morning, Watching tourists approach with noticeably more respect than they had shown months earlier, he thought about the unexpected ways life could change. He had simply done his job, but that simple act had influenced training programs, legal proceedings, and public discourse around the world. A young boy approached with his parents, clearly recognizing Marcus from the famous footage. Instead of trying to make him break character, the child simply stood at attention himself, offering a small salute that Marcus acknowledged with the slightest nod. The parents smiled proudly, understanding that their son had learned something important about respect and service. The morning sun cast familiar shadows across the courtyard as Marcus settled into his routine, ready for whatever challenges the day might bring. His moment of fame would eventually fade, but the principles that had guided his actions would endure. Training, discipline, and dedication to duty never went out of style, and would always be ready when circumstances demanded their application.